Thank you. Okay, so for the sake of completion, we'll just restart.
Yeah.
So last week, Avadhut Brahman had talked about 17 of the 24 gurus. In this chapter, he's going to talk about 7 remaining gurus and 1 additional guru, his own body. So he says the instruction that he received from his next guru, a hawk, is that attachment creates misery. But someone who's not attached to anything and does not have any material possession, or at least doesn't consider material possessions to be his, like akinchana, he or she is qualified to achieve unlimited happiness. And he gave the example of a large group of hawks who attacked one another. And actually, they attacked one hawk who was weaker, because this hawk was holding some meat. And this group of hawks wanted that meat. So they attacked the weaker hawk who had meat in his mouth. So the weaker hawk realized that his life was in danger. So he gave up his meat. And they let him alone. And he was happy because his life was spared. So if he had kept his attachment, he would have been killed. So that's the lesson that he learned from the hawk. Then he said, there are 2 types of people in this world who are free from all anxiety, and they always merged in great happiness. One of them is a retarded person, yes, retarded person, or a childish fool, and one who has approached the Supreme Lord. So again, only 2 types of happy. One is a retarded, dumb kind of person or childish fool. A second person is one who has approached Supreme Lord and surrendered to him. They are the only 2 happy people in the whole world. And he said, the instruction he received from a young girl. And the story was that this girl kept only 1 conch shell bracelet on each wrist. And he said what he learned from that was that one should remain alone and steady one's mind. Then only will it be possible for someone to fix their mind completely upon the Supreme Personality of God. So I guess it wasn't very clear to King Yadu what he was talking about. So then he explained. So once again, to repeat myself, he said, I learned from a girl who kept only 1 conch shell bracelet on each wrist. And so he saw the quizzical look on Yadu, King Yadu. So he explained it. He said, the story is that one day, this girl was alone in her house. Her parents had gone somewhere, and whoever lived in the same house, her relatives, they'd also gone with the parents to some other place. And while the parents and these relatives were gone, a few men arrived at the house. And these men wanted to marry this girl. She received them nicely with great hospitality. And she excused herself, saying, let me go and cook some prasadam for you people. You are our guests. So she went inside and began to make preparations for these unexpected guests. I mean, that's the real meaning of the word guest in Hindi or Sanskrit. It's called atithi. And atithi means someone who shows up without prior announcement. No date, just shows up. So that's atithi. So these were atithis that just showed up, big surprise. But anyway, she said, I'll go and cook something for you. So in those days, it wasn't that you have rice in the house, you have, a dough in the house or flour in the house, the wheat flour or whatever. You had to actually prepare right from the scratch. So literally, they had rice with the husks. So you have to beat that rice to get the rice grains out that you can cook. So as she was beating them, she had a number of conch shell bracelets in her arm. So they were colliding with each other and they were making a loud noise. I mean, you can imagine chun, chun, chun. They were making that noise. So now this girl was afraid that these people would think that her family is poor because their daughter was doing the menial work of husking this rice. So she was a very intelligent girl and shy, but very intelligent. So she broke the shell bracelets from her arms, leaving only 2 on each wrist. And she continued to husk the rice. But even these 2 bracelets on each wrist continued to collide and make noise. So she took 1 bracelet off each arm, and now she had only 1 bracelet on each wrist. And therefore, there was no more noise. Problem solved. And Avadhuta said, the lesson I learned from this, that wherever you have more than 1 person living together in one place, they will undoubtedly be quarreling. I can't stop that. There'll be arguments, there'll be quarrels, there will be noise. My mother used to say, wherever you have 2 pots, there will be noise. Even if there's only 2 people living together, there will be useless gossip and disagreement. Therefore, to avoid conflict, one should live alone. That was the lesson he learned. Then he said, I learned another lesson from an arrow maker, not the arrow shirt, this bow and arrow. I learned another lesson from an arrow maker who was so absorbed in making an arrow that he did not even notice that the king was passing right by him on the road. And he said the lesson was that one must strictly control one's mind, concentrating it in the worship of Lord Hari or Lord Krishna. He said, I learned from serpent that a sage should wander alone, should not have any fixed residence, should always be careful and grave, and should not reveal his movements. He should take assistance from no one and speak very little. Then he talked about the spider as his next guru. He said, just like from within himself, a spider expands thread through his mouth. He plays with it for some time and then swallows it back. Similarly, the Supreme Personality of Godhead expands his potency from within himself to manifest the material world. Then he performs pastimes in the material world and then eventually withdraws it completely within himself. So creation, maintenance, and annihilation, all done by the Supreme Personality of God, just like that spider. This I learned from an insect. Who had been caught by a wasp. And he said, what I learned was that if out of love, hate, or fear, an embodied soul fixes his mind with intelligence and full concentration upon a particular bodily form, he will certainly attain that form in his next life, that form that he's meditating upon. The context was that he had once seen an insect trapped by a wasp in his hive, and the insect was so scared, so fearful, that he constantly meditated upon his captor, the wasp. And without giving up his body, he gradually achieved the same state as the wasp. So he said, therefore, my conclusion is that one achieves a state of existence according to one's constant concentration. And that is what actually Lord Krishna spoke in chapter 8, in verses 5 and 6. What did he say? Antakale cha mameva isvarana muktva kalevaram. Ya prayati samad bhavam, my nature. Asti nasti atra sanshaya. And if not concentrating upon me, he said, yam yam vapi smarana bhavam tejati antah kalevaram. Tam tam evaiti kaunte sada tad bhavita. He says, if you're concentrating on something else, then that's the form you will get. So same thing. So Krishna has confirmed what Avadhuta is saying as a lesson he got from an insect who had been caught by a wasp. So that's the remaining 7 gurus. So there's total of 24 Shiksha gurus. And then he said, my dear king, I would like you to listen to what I learned from my own body, which is my 25th guru. He said, my material body teaches me detachment. How? The body is subject to creation. It takes birth and destruction, it dies. It always comes to a painful end. Thus, although using my body to acquire knowledge, I always remember that it will be ultimately be consumed by others, like either by fire or by insects or jackals and dogs and hawks and all this kind of thing. Therefore, I remain detached and I move about this world in complete detachment of this body, which is the hardest thing to be detached from. He said, that's what I learned. It's temporary. There today, it'll be gone tomorrow. For sure, guaranteed. Jatasya dhruvam mrityu, dhruvam jat, dhruvam, how does it go? Jatasya dhruvam mrityu, how does it go? Jatasya dhruvam mrityu, anybody remembers? Jatasya dhruvam mrityu, dhruva, yeah. Jatasya dhruvam mrityu, dhruvam, anyway. Anyway, so basically saying, Krishna is saying, if you're born, you will die. And so Avadhuta continued, he said, a man who's attached to the body, he will accumulate money with great struggle to expand and protect the position of his family with his wife, children, property, domestic animals, servants, homes, relatives, friends. You can go on adding to the list. He said, and he does all this for the gratification of his own body. So just like a tree produces the seed of a future tree before dying, similarly, the dying body of a human manifests the seed of one's next material body in the form of one's accumulated karma. So he's not talking about the son of a person. He's talking about his own body. The next body that he will get, he performs karmas which determine his next body. So Avadhuta is saying those karmas are the seed of the next material body that this person will get. And by doing that, everyone assures the continuation of their material existence. I hope that's clear. He said, a man who has many wives is constantly harassed by them. He's responsible for the maintenance. So all the wives constantly pull him in different directions according to their own self-interest. So he's constantly being pulled in many, many different directions. And he doesn't know, main idhar jaun ki main udhar jaun. Should I go this way or that way? He says, similarly, the material senses, there's 10 of them, harass the conditioned soul, pulling him in many directions all at once. For example, on one side, the tongue is pulling him to arrange for tasty food. And then thirst drags him to get a suitable drink. Simultaneously, the genitals clamor for satisfaction, and the sense of touch demands soft, sensuous objects. The belly harasses him until it is filled. The ears demand to hear some pleasing sounds. The sense of smell hankers for pleasant aromas. The fickle eyes clamor for pleasing sights. So just some examples. He said, thus the senses, the organs and limbs, all desiring satisfaction, pull the living entity in so many different directions, makes his life hell. He said, the Lord has created 8.4 million species of life to house the conditioned souls. 8.4 million different types of bodies in which the soul enters. Yet, by creating the forms of trees, reptiles, animals, birds, snakes, and so on, the Lord was not satisfied within his heart. So then he created human life, which offers the conditioned soul sufficient intelligence to perceive the absolute truth and become pleased. So what he's saying is that after many, many births and deaths, one achieves the rare human form of life. So only 400,000 out of 8.4 million are human forms of life. Now, yes, it's temporary, but it affords one the opportunity to attain the highest perfection. Prahlad Maharaj said the same thing to his friends. He says, Kaumaram achret pragyo dharman bhagavataniya durlabham manusham janma adhruvam tadatham api. Sorry. Yeah. So he said that even though the material body is temporary, one should engage in devotional service from the age of 5. Because the human body is very rare, don't waste any time. So same thing, Avadhut is saying exactly the same. So therefore, his conclusion was a sober human being should quickly endeavor for the ultimate perfection of life as long as the body is alive. So before it dies, endeavor for the ultimate perfection of life. Because he says, I mean, after all, the sense gratification is available on even in the most abominable species of life, whatever that is. Whether it's a dog or a crab or a snake or whatever. They all have sense gratification, but only humans can do more. It's only humans who can go after Krishna consciousness. It's only possible for a human being. So don't waste this opportunity. So then he finished by saying that having learned from my spiritual masters, I remain situated in Krishna consciousness and fully renounced and enlightened by the spiritual knowledge I've gained from these spiritual masters. And in that knowledge, I wander the earth without any attachment or false ego. And Lord Krishna said, having heard that whole thing from Avadhut, King Yadu became free from all material attachment and fixed his mind onto the spiritual platform. So I'm going to pause and see if there are any questions or comments or how many lost souls are here. I have no idea what I'm talking about. Any questions or comments?
Yes, Prabhuji, I have.
Yes, Prabhuji.
Prabhuji, how many people in this human form of life have get a chance at the age of 5 to start thinking about the Supreme Personality of Godhead, like Prahlad Maharaj or Dhruv Maharaj? Not very many people can get that opportunity unless they have some karmas done in their previous life, or I don't know, really, even at that time, we cannot say there are very little chance of get the mercy of some guru or some kind of sage or whatever. How we can get a mercy of that kind of personality to start our life at that age on meditation, the Supreme Personality of Godhead.
Prabhuji, you are right. We talked about how rare a human birth is. a devotee birth is even more rare. So Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita 7.3, Manushyanam sahastreshu kaschit yatat siddha. Tatam api siddhanam kaschin me veti tattva. Out of the thousands and thousands and thousands, one person achieves perfection. And out of thousands and thousands of those who achieve perfection, hardly anyone knows me. So that's how rare it is to have a devotee life. Now, so what to do? Rupa Goswami has explained that Ado Shraddha Tato Sadhusam. If we have that faith, soft faith, but faith, then Krishna will arrange for a devotee to be available to you to give you that association with which you can make progress on the devotional path. So how do you get Shraddha? Shraddha you get by somehow or the other, knowingly or unknowingly, serving a devotee. So I always give the example of a person planting a mango tree. Planting it and then going away wherever he came from, forgetting about he had ever planted a tree. That tree grows, and now it has fruits, mangoes. And one day a devotee comes in the month of June, it's very hot in India. He sees the mango tree and sits under the shade of this tree. After some time, he looks up, he sees these mangoes, plucks a few, eats them, and goes on his way. The devotee doesn't know who planted the tree. The person who planted the tree doesn't know that a devotee sat there. But he gets the credit for having served the devotee. It's called Agyat Sukriti. Doesn't even know, but he gets that Sukriti, which results in Shraddha. So probably when you say karmas, so somewhere, somehow, they must have done some karmas to get that Shraddha. And that's the beginning of your devotional life. But once again, it's very rare, even more rare than human birth. Okay?
Okay, Prabhuji, thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, all right. Then let's move on.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Ha, Prabhu, bolo. Yes.
Yes. So we on the same line, Prabhu. Like we got like a very late opportunity to see like Krishna consciousness, right? But how can we engage our generation, new generation, like slowly, like gradually? How can we convince them, like our children's?
That's a very good question.
Focus on.
Very, very timely question, because all temples are struggling with that issue. And so, Prabhu, it's like anything else. If we want to teach our children to work hard, to have good work ethics, to be well-mannered, well-behaved, learn certain skill, what's the best way to teach them? Not by telling them, that doesn't work. So they will learn what they observe. So which means that you have to be their role model. That's the first thing. They learn from your behavior, not from your instructions. For example, you cannot be smoking and tell your children not to smoke. That doesn't work. You cannot be a lazy bum and ask your children to have very good, strong work ethics. That won't work. So they have to learn from you. So that's the first point. The second point is that you have to provide an environment in which they feel encouraged to do what you want them to do without you asking them to do. So let me give you an example, precisely what you are asking. To encourage young people at a temple, any temple, to become more involved, you have to give them an environment where they feel trusted, they feel welcomed to take initiatives, they feel encouraged when they come up with ideas, they're not put down immediately. They're given some independence and freedom to do what they want to do. And above all, they're given freedom to make mistakes without any negative consequences. As a matter of fact, if they're encouraged to make mistakes, idea being, if you don't try something new, how will you ever grow? And it's okay if it doesn't work out. Go on to something else. So, I mean, I'm just giving some examples. So if we do things like that, the young people would be encouraged. But if you beat them up every time they make a mistake, or you shut them up every time they come up with an idea, they'll never be involved. Why would they? So those are some of the things that we can take a look at. And some temples do it well, some temples don't do it well at all. But that's what we have to do to encourage them, because there are so many other distractions, Prabhu. So many other distractions, and there's a natural distrust of older people. So you have to earn their trust. You have to earn their, and I keep saying you, I mean all of us, you have to earn their friendship. They won't earn our friendship. That those days are gone. That was my generation. When we looked up to our parents and did whatever they said. That's gone, Prabhu. That will never happen again. So therefore, we have to attract them to us by our behavior, by our conduct, by our philosophy, and so on and so forth. Philosophy of living. I'm not talking about Krishna conscious philosophy. Just the way we live, just the way we interact with other people. Whether we're helpful to them or not, are we rude to them or not, are we welcoming, are we hospitable, all those kind of things. They observe that, and that's what they learn. So I hope I'm answering your question, Prabhu.
No, it's very good, Prabhu. Yeah, we need to set an example for them as well.
Yes. And that's the only way, Prabhu, only way. We cannot instruct them to do anything anymore. They just walk away.
Yeah, they just walk.
They just walk away, Prabhu. They have so much freedom these days. They're quite independent, not like, when I was a kid.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Sure, Prabhu. Thank you. Anyone else?
One question, Prabhu, I had, like 400,000 human species, does demigods fall into that category, or they have?
No, Prabhu, demigods are not human category.
Okay.
It's a demigod category.
Okay. So this 400,000 basically is humans across all material universe.
Yes, correct. So different planets,
Different planets, yeah.
different countries, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Yes. Some actually do look like ET. They're humans, but they look like ET.
Mhm.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, then I'll keep going. Okay. So now remember that dialogue is between Lord Krishna and Uddhav. This is a beautiful thing about Srimad Bhagavatam. So first, Srimad Bhagavatam especially, but just about all the Vedic literature is based on question answers. Every Puran you read, somebody's asking a question and somebody's answering it. Now, Bhagavatam is very interesting in that. How does it start? Anybody wants to tell me? How does Srimad Bhagavatam start?
Like sages want to help to the humankind. They perform the yajnas and they put a questions to his guru.
Correct. Exactly right, Prabhu. So the 80,000 sages, they ask questions of Sutaji. Sutaji, now, here's the loop that goes. Sutaji starts talking about Shukdev Goswami, who's being asked questions from Parikshit Maharaj.
Raja Parikshit. Yeah.
Sorry?
Yeah.
So Parikshit Maharaj is asking questions from Shukdev Goswami. Sud Goswami is narrating those questions and answers. And then Shukdev Goswami starts talking about, and then Vidura asked Uddhava, who sent him to Maitreya Muni, then Vidura is asking Maitreya Rishi, and then you hear all those things. So Sud Goswami is telling what Shukdev Goswami said about Vidura asking Maitreya Rishi. And then Maitreya Rishi starts talking about, when Narad Muni, Yudhishthira Maharaj asked a question from Narad Muni. So this just keeps going on. But the whole Bhagavatam is simply question answers. Right? Which is the way it should be. Because somebody has a question, somebody has curiosity, and that's what's being satisfied. Okay. Anyway, so in this case here, Lord Krishna is talking to Uddhav, but in that he talked about King Yadu asking something from Avadhut, who answered the questions. Now Krishna is back again, talking directly to Uddhav. Right? So now Krishna is telling Uddhav how the spirit soul, which is embodied in a material body, how can it develop pure transcendental knowledge? Because remember, soul is inside the material body, kind of like a material cage. So how does the soul then develop pure transcendental knowledge, having a material covering around? And he started answering it. He said, the Vaishnava, what's the definition of Vaishnava? Anybody? How do you define a Vaishnava?
The person who believes in Lord Vishnu.
Yes. So a person who's taken shelter of Lord Vishnu is a Vaishnava. So he said, a Vaishnava should observe the rules and regulations found in the Pancharatra. So actually there is a very wonderful verse in Nectar of Devotion by Rupa Goswami. He said, Shruti Smriti Puranadi Pancharatri Vidhim Vina Ekantikir Harere Bhakti Utpat Ev Kalpate. He says, if somebody is performing devotional service to Lord Krishna, but without following the rules and regulations of the Vedas, the Puranas, the Pancharatras, etc., is simply causing disturbance in the society. Now, this guy is thinking he's doing devotional service. Rupa Goswami is saying because he's not following the Vedas and the Puranas and the Pancharatras, he's simply creating disturbance in the society. Same thing Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita in chapter 16, text 23. What does he say? Yas shastra vidhim utsrajya vartate kamakarata na sasiddhim avapnosi na sukham na paramrati. Anybody who does not follow the injunctions of the Vedic literature, he never achieves perfection, nor does he ever get happiness, nor does he get the ultimate destination. So very, very important, take shelters, to follow the rules and regulations found in the Vedic literatures or Vaishnava literatures. Okay. Anyway, so, excuse me. So he says, some of the more relevant instructions are that one should follow the Varnashram system. What's Varnashram system? What did Krishna say about Varnashram system in Bhagavad Gita? Anybody knows? What did he say about in the 4th chapter, text 13? What did he say about what is Varnashram system?
Chaturvarnamaya system.
Chapter 4, text 13.
Chaturvarnamaya system.
Yes, correct. Chaturvarnamaya system, gun karma. So Varnashram is by quality and the work. So one should follow the Varnashram system according to their natural qualities and work. So that's the first thing. And Krishna also talks in Bhagavad Gita twice, chapter 3 and chapter 18, that it's better to follow your own dharma, which means your natural proclivity, natural inclinations, imperfectly than somebody else's perfectly. So same thing being said here again. Second, he said, give up the work performed for sense gratification and accept work as a matter of duty. He said, however, once somebody understands the nature of the soul, then one should give up material work performed out of duty and simply engage in the service of a spiritual master, a bona fide spiritual master, who is a representative of the Lord. And then Lord Krishna concluded by saying, after saying these three things, is one who's attached to the fruits of his material work cannot achieve any substantial goal in life because the results of karmas are always temporary. Karmas are material. Therefore, the results of material, and therefore, by definition, they're temporary. And, excuse me, and ultimately they result in lamentation and suffering. What does Krishna say in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 5, text 22? Yehi sansparshaja bhoga dukshiyoniya evte. Adi antavantah kaunte nateshu ramte buddha. Same thing Krishna saying again. So he's basically repeating what he had already told Arjun at the Battle of Kurukshetra. And he said, if you are on the path of materialism, forget about ever having natural or uninterrupted happiness, like everlasting happiness. Just forget about it. That won't happen. Everything in the material world, including material happiness, is not only temporary, but also the cause of distress. Dukh yonya is the mother of dukh, mother of unhappiness, mother of distress, mother of misery. Any questions or comments? Anyone? Okay, then I'll keep going. So then Krishna talks about the symptoms of conditioned soul and liberated soul. So conditioned soul and liberated soul. He's talking about the difference between the two. He also talks about the characteristics of a devotee and how they perform devotional service. So he said that spirit soul is part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Mameva ansho jivaloke, jiva bhuta sanatana. Chapter 15, text 7. And he said, therefore, being part and parcel of the Lord, it is superior to material energy. We all know that, right? 7.5, Krishna says, aparayam vitanstanyam prakritim vidme param. Is superior to the material energy that living entity. Jivbhuta mahabaho yedam dharite jagat. So 7.5. So he says, so it is part and parcel of Krishna. It is superior to material energy, but it is infinitesimal in size. So because of its infinitesimal size, it becomes overwhelmed by the inferior material energy, Maya. And when that happens, the soul is forced to accept a material body in any one of the three material modes of nature, goodness, passion, or ignorance. And it's been like this since ever. Since, Prabhupada used to say, since time immemorial. Nobody knows when that started. It's been there ever since. But when that soul takes the shelter of pure devotional service, then it becomes eternally liberated, never to become entangled again. And he said, therefore, transcendental knowledge is the cause of a living entity's liberation, and ignorance, avidya, is the cause of the bondage. So transcendental knowledge causes liberation, ignorance causes bondage. Simple. And he says, those living entities who become attracted to the modes of material nature, they become bewildered by false ego. In other words, they start to identify with the body. So therefore, because they're identifying with the body, they start to see themselves as the enjoyers of misery, confusion, happiness, distress, danger, on and on and on. And in this way, they meditate upon such states that when you think about it, they don't exist in the spiritual world. There's no misery, there's no confusion, there is no distress, there's no danger in the material world. Sorry, in the spiritual world. But they all exist in the material world. So these people are meditating upon those things that exist only in the material world. So how can they go to the spiritual world? And then he says, also remember, both the soul and the super soul reside within the same body. The difference is that the almighty super soul is fully cognizant, Satchidanand, but Chitta is actually working, not covered. And therefore, being fully cognizant, super soul does not indulge in enjoying the fruits of material world, but remains simply as a witness. Whereas the infinitesimal conditioned soul, out of ignorance, suffers the consequences of his own work. So Kathopanishad gives the example of two birds on a tree. One is enjoying the fruit of the tree, other is simply witnessing it. Krishna again says in Bhagavad Gita chapter 13, I think it's text 23, Updrashta anumantacha bharta bhokta maheshwara paramatma iti chapi yukto dehe asmin purushapara. She says, yes, the super soul is there acting as the witness and the sanctioner. The liberated living entity, on the other hand, in spite of being within the material body, and it's in the material body because of either the remaining actions of karma, so the last vestiges of karma, or by order of the Lord. Either way, liberated soul does not become disturbed by the happiness and suffering of the body, because first of all, he realizes he's not this body. But second, and this is a very nice example given, that he sees bodily experiences in the same way as a person who has just awakened from a dream sees his dream experiences. He knows these are not real. I mean, he may have been a tiger, he may have been a king, or he may have been being bit by snakes or whatever. It's all unreal. They say, oh, it was just a dream. I'm fine now. So same thing. So he sees the bodily experience the same way that as a person who awakes from a dream and says, oh, that was just a dream. On the other hand, when a conditioned living soul who in reality is not the enjoyer of the happiness and misery, because remember, it's a spiritual entity. But because he identifies with the body, he imagines himself to be the enjoyer of his bodily experience. Again, going back to the example of the dream, it's like in a dream, we imagine us to be a tiger or king or whatever. We think the experience is real while dreaming. Only when we wake up from the dream, we say, oh, that was just a dream, not real. He said, a detached person who's able to cut off all his doubts with a sort of appropriate renunciation. Srila Rupa Goswami used the term yukta vairagya. That takes care of all the doubts. Why? Because his senses, his mind, and his intelligence, they don't fix themselves upon sense objects. So because the senses, the mind, and the intelligence are not fixed on the sense objects, he remains liberated even while situated within the material body. Once again, going back to Nectar of Devotion, another very famous verse says, Iha yasya hare dasya mansa karmana gira nikhlashu api avasthashu jivan mukta sa uchyate. He said a person is eternally liberated even in his body when he has surrendered completely to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Under all conditions and all situations, he is liberated. So he says, regardless of whether he's harassed or worshipped, he remains equipoised. Tulya ninda stuti mona, santushto yena kenchit. Again, chapter 12, text 18 or 19. 19. So He says that kind of a person is considered liberated even in this life. And he says liberated person has nothing to do with piety or sin in this world. He sees everything equally. Again, back to chapter 12, he says, Shubha Shubha Parityagi. A devotee gives up anything auspicious or inauspicious, just doesn't want. Also, a self-satisfied sage does not praise or condemn anyone. He does not speak uselessly to anyone and does not fix his mind on material things. So what does he do? He's always merged in meditation upon the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So what happens? Fools think he's a speechless, crazy person, but the liberated person says, I don't want to waste my time with you. I don't want to waste my time doing pujalpa. So, Krishna explains further that if a person, even if a person has studied or maybe even taught all the Vedic literatures, but he has not developed pure attraction for the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he has accomplished nothing beyond his labor. I mean, in a situation like that, one's endeavor is like that of a man who works very hard to take care of a cow that gives no milk. What a wonderful analogy. Taking care of this cow, working very hard to take care of it, and the cow gives no milk. This is another wonderful verse of Srimad Bhagavatam. Let's see, what does it say? Dharma sunista punsa vishwaksen kathasya yad na utpadet yadiratim shrameva kevalam. He says, one can perform all his duties. He can even indulge in hearing about the Lord, chanting about the Lord. But if he's not developing the love of God, then whatever he's doing is simply useless labor. There will be no tangible result of his work. And Krishna expressed further, he says, my dear Uddhava, that man is certainly most miserable who takes care of a cow that gives no milk, or has an unchaste wife, or a body which is totally dependent on others, or has useless children, or wealth not utilized for the right purpose. That's the miserly person. Karparne dosho aparasvabhava, Arjuna says. Similarly, one who studies Vedic knowledge, devoid of my glories, is also most miserable. Again, Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 3, Text 28 says, Vasudeva Paraveda. The whole purpose of studying the Vedas is to know Krishna. Again, going back, 15:15 Bhagavad Gita, Vedasya Sarvam Ahamaya Vedya. The whole purpose of studying the Vedas is to know me. If you don't do that, what's the use of studying the Vedas? So he says, anyone who studies Vedic literature that's devoid of my glories is most miserable. So don't be that. He said, well, then what to do? He said, an intelligent person should never take to literatures that do not contain description of my activities, Krishna is saying. If they don't talk about me and my pastimes, don't bother reading them. Because my pastimes purify the whole universe. He said, I am the one who creates, maintains, and annihilates the entire material manifestation. Any so-called knowledge that does not recognize my pastimes is simply barren and is not acceptable to those who are actually intelligent. So therefore, my dear Uddhava, one should fix his mind upon me at all times. But if that is not possible, then one should perform all their activities as an offering to me without trying to enjoy the fruits. And those of you who have read chapter 12 of Bhagavad Gita, that's exactly what it says. Krishna says, first, you should fix your mind upon me. Says, oh, if you can't do that, then at least perform devotional service. Do all the rules and regulations of devotional service. If you can't do that, then you work for me. If you can't do that, then give up the results of your work to me. If you can't do that, at least develop knowledge. So he's saying same thing here. If you can't fix your mind upon me all the time, then perform all your work as an offering to me. Yat karoshi yadasnasi, yat juhoshi dadasyat, yat tapasasate kaunteya, tat kurusha madarpada. Saying, whatever you do, whether you eat, whether you give into charity, whether you perform austerities, whatever work you do it as an offering to me. So same thing. Very consistent, very, very consistent. And he continued. He said, narrations of my pastimes and my qualities. So actually, his name, his form, his qualities, his pastimes, they're all auspicious and they purify the entire universe. It's a person who hears, I should say, who constantly hears all the time. Apratihata. You know the verse, Savai Punsam Mano Parodharmo Jato Bhakti Adhoksha Aprahitita. Ayataki Apratihata, Yayatma Suprasidhi. Chapter Canto 1, chapter 2, text 6. So Sud Goswami is saying same thing. He says, one who constantly hears, glorifies, remembers my transcendental pastimes, or even through dramatic performances, relives my pastimes, and who takes full shelter of me, dedicates all his activities, whether they're religious or sensual or occupational, for my satisfaction. He is the one, or she's the one, who obtains unflinching devotion to me. So let me repeat this, very important. He says, narrations of my pastimes, my form, my name, my qualities, they're all auspicious and they purify the entire universe. A person who constantly hears my glories, my pastimes, my name, my form, my qualities, and remembers them all the time, or who through some dramatic performances relives my pastime. So Krishna Leela, and who takes full shelter of me, dedicating all his activities, whether they're religious, sensual, or occupational, and does it all for my satisfaction. He's the one who definitely, certainly obtains unflinching devotional service to me. In chapter 8, text 14, Krishna says, Ananya Chetsa Satam Yo Mam Smriti Nitisha Tasyaham Sulabha Partha Nityuktas Yogana. He says that a person who exclusively, with single focus, thinking of me all the time, remembering me all the time, to him, I'm very easily available. Never mind what the Vedas are saying, that is very difficult to achieve. All you have to do is constantly remember me, my form, my name, my pastime, glorify me, my pastimes, and take full shelter of me. Dedicate your activity to me. You will guaranteed get unflinching devotional service to me. And then he says, anyone who has obtained pure devotional service by the association of my devotees always engages in worshipping me and very easily goes to my abode. Tasyaham sulabha partha. Very easily goes to my abode. He obtains me. So then Uddhava said, my Lord, what type of person do you consider to be a true devotee? And what type of devotional service is approved by great devotees as worthy of being offered to your Lordship? Please explain this to me. So what's he asking? What type of person, in his opinion, is a true devotee? And what type of devotional service is approved as worthy of being offered to you? Like. Sorry. So do you get the question? Yes, no?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Yes, Prabhuji.
Okay, thank you. So, Lord Krishna said, a real Vaishnava is qualified with the following 26 characteristics. Now, you all have read in Namamrita and other places the 26 qualities of a devotee, a pure devotee. So I won't get into all those, the ones that I can remember that are top of my head. Devotee is merciful, right? He's not envious of other people. He's always truthful, self-control, right? He's clean, he's gentle. Prabhupada said, you should be a gentleman. He's happy to help anyone, he's peaceful and depending upon Krishna alone, right? Amanina Manina, always respecting other people, not expecting respect for themselves. He's compassionate, he's friendly. And there may be others, but those are the main ones that I can remember off the top of my head. And one day we should all, when sitting alone in a temple room of our home, ask ourselves, put this list in front of us and ask ourselves, how many of these qualities do I have? Even 50%. Doesn't have to be 100%. And ask ourselves. And if the list is only 3 or 4 long out of 26, then I think we have some work to do. And we should seriously look at that, because this is what will help us become better devotees. Sure, some of the qualities come automatically when we become better devotee, but it's better to work on it so we become better devotee. Okay. Okay. And he said, out of the 26 that I have talked about, the principal one, can anybody guess what would be the principal quality of a pure devotee?
Being humble.
Being humble, okay, all right. If you had to have only one in a pure devotee.
Sincerity to serve.
Sincerity, what?
To serve.
Sincerity, okay, all right, yeah.
We are always talking about,
I'm sorry,
always talking about the Supreme Personality of Godhead.
Okay, Prabhu, I think it's your phone that's causing all the echo. But I think you said that he's always serving the Lord constantly. Sorry, say again.
Always, whatever, yat, like you have said, yat karoti, karosi, yad,
Okay.
dasi, yad johoti, dasi, yat kapatyasi kauntya, tat karo ishvamad arpitam. So whatever we do, it has to be done. Remember, keep the Supreme Personality of Godhead in your mind. Whatever you are doing, like cooking and all that, should be kept in mind that this is whatever I'm doing for the service of the Lord.
Okay, sure, good, good. Anyone else? Another guess?
Remembering and chanting always the name of Lord Krishna.
Okay, all right. Okay, so all good answers. What Krishna said was that the principal characteristic of a Vaishnava is that he takes shelter of Krishna and Krishna alone. No one else. No one else. And he engages exclusively in Krishna's service. He says, that's the topmost devotee. Now, anybody remembers from chapter 6 of Bhagavad Gita, text 46? What does Krishna say? What's the topmost yogi? Yes, bro? So, yogi nam api sarvesham madgate nantaratma Shraddhavan bhajate yo mam samay yukta tamo mata. Right? He says, out of all the yogis, the one who's always engaged in my service with great degree of faith is the topmost yogi. So again, Krishna is being very, very consistent, no confusion. Whether you hear in canto 11 of Bhagavatam, or whether you read in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 6, answer is still the same. Very, very consistent. Okay. So then he says, There are 64 kinds of devotional activities. And if we engage in them, we can give up our false pride and prestige. So the whole thing about false ego, false pride, and worrying about our own prestige, it goes away if we engage in 64 kinds of devotional service or activities. So again, I won't go through all 64, nor can I remember them. But the main ones are worshiping the Lord, serving the Lord, glorifying the Lord, offering obeisances to the Lord. Man mana bhavma bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru. Right? As he says twice, 9th chapter, 18th chapter in Bhagavad Gita. So same idea here. Another good one is developing attachment for hearing the chanting of the Lord's qualities, pastimes, and also form and name, etc., etc. Offering everything one acquires to the Lord. Todiyam vastu govindam tubhimaya samarpaya, which says, everything is yours, my Lord. I'm only simply offering it back to you. Like someone offers water of Ganges back to the Ganges. Engaging in glorification of the Lord's birth and activities. What does Krishna say in Bhagavad Gita? Janmakram cha me divyam evam yogiti takta. So same idea, right? Offering bhoga, taking initiation from a bona fide spiritual master, cleansing the temple, humbly cleansing the temple, even maybe painting the temple room and things like that. So again, not all 64, but some of those that I can remember off the top of my head and thought were very important. He mentions all 64. And then he says, Uddhav, my dear Uddhav, I am personally the ultimate shelter and way of life for devotees. There was a very famous mundane Bollywood song, but it really appeals to me a lot from a movie called Lagan. It says, Tum bin hamara koi nahi. Right? Beautiful song, but beautiful sentiments. Or Mirabai says, Mere to Giridhar Gopal dusro na koi. Right? So that's the idea. Krishna is saying, this is what I'm looking for. I am personally the ultimate shelter and way of life for devotees. They know nothing but me. And I know nothing but them. Narottam Das Thakur sings in the praise of the Vaishnavas. He says, how does it go? Tomare hriday sada Govinda Vishram, Govinda kahene mama Vaishnava Paran. He says, my dear Vaishnava, Lord resides in your heart. But the Lord says, a devotee, a Vaishnava is my life air. I can't survive without. And he says, if one does not engage in my loving devotional service, then for all practical purposes, one possesses no effective means for escaping from material existence. That's a very powerful line. So I'm going to repeat this. Basically, he's saying that if you do not perform loving devotional service, there's no way to get out of this material world. So the only escape mechanism is to take ultimate shelter of the Lord, to surrender fully. What does he say in 7:14? Which talks about the escape. Anybody? Chapter 7, text 14. Daivihi esha gunamai mam maya duratya mamev je prapadyante maya etantaratite. Maya is keeping us in the material world. There's no way to win over her unless we surrender completely to the Lord. And then we can get out. Then we get our exit visa from the material world. And then Lord says something very sweet. He said, my dear Uddhava, because you are my servant, my well-wisher, and my friend, now I shall speak to you the most confidential knowledge. So when I read that, I said, wait a minute, I thought this is all confidential knowledge. But saying, no, even better. So better is still coming. So I'm going to pause again See if any questions or comments or doubts or something that's not clear, or just a confession, Prabhuji, you put me to sleep. I'll accept any one of those.
No, all are listening properly, probably.
Thank you. So
No one thinking.
any questions or comments? Okay, I'll keep going.
I remember yesterday's one verse where it said, devotee conquers the Lord,
Yes.
and Lord conquers the devotee.
Yes, exactly.
But Prabhuji, I was just thinking how fortunate is Uddhava. Lord is sitting 1-to-1 and giving all this.
Just imagine. Just imagine.
Yeah.
Just imagine. Yeah, what a privilege. I mean, but Uddhav is special anyway. The Lord goes to you for consultation.
Yeah.
I mean, has to be someone very, very special. So he's saying, hey, you're my servant, my well-wisher, my friend. So therefore, I shall now speak to you the most confidential knowledge. Well, Krishna said same thing to Arjun. What did he say? Anybody remembers? From chapter 4, text 3, I think. Bhaktosi me sakha cheti, rahasam etad uttamam. So I'll reveal to you the most beneficial, the perfect knowledge because you're my devotee and my friend.
Friend.
Right?
Yep.
So same thing. Again, I admire the consistency, not surprised by it, but I admire the consistency of everything. Anyway, so having said that, Krishna now starts by emphasizing the importance of devotee association. So devotee association becomes the seed for every devotional activity or devotional life. So remember that famous verse in Nectar of Devotion, Ado Shraddha. What's the next thing? Anybody?
Sadhu Sang.
Tato Sadhu Sang, exactly. So that's the beginning. That's the beginning. That's the beginning of devotional service. As a matter of fact, it is said, again in Nectar of Devotion, that only way we obtain devotional service is by mercy of the Lord or the Lord's devotees. That's the only way. We cannot, there's no process otherwise to get devotional service. So he says, Krishna explains that the association of devotees destroys the soul's attachment to material life. And if pure, is capable of bringing even the Supreme Lord Krishna under one's control. This is what Mahajan Prabhu was referring to in our discussion yesterday. The devotee conquers the Lord, brings him under control. The Supreme Controller is brought under the control of his pure devotee. And then Krishna says, yoga, Sankhya philosophy, ordinary everyday religious duties, studying of scriptures, any amount of austerities, renunciation, charity, any kind of vows for fasting, worship of the deity, all the tantras, mantras, and mudras, secret mantras, visiting the holy places, or any amount of regulative principles, they cannot get the same result as the association of the devotees. How powerful is that? He says, no amount of yoga or any type of yoga, or study of Sankhya philosophy, or religious duties, or studying the scriptures, or any austerities, or renunciation, or charity, worshipping even the deities, or mantras, tantras, mudras, all those kind of things, visiting the pilgrimage places, any amount of regulative principles, none of them give the same result as the association of devotees. How powerful is that? And then he says, demons, birds, animals, some human beings, they cannot study the Vedic scriptures. They don't have the opportunity. But even if they attain the association of the devotees, they may achieve the supreme abode of the Lord. Demons, birds, animals, human beings, like for example, Shudras were not allowed to study Vedic scriptures. Women were not allowed to study. So even they, simply by devotee association, can achieve the supreme abode of the Lord, go home back to Godhead. Whereas without such association, such devotee association, even those who are very seriously endeavoring, again, same list, yoga, Sankhya, charity, vows, renunciation, all those, they cannot attain the Lord. Just repeating the same thing a slightly different way. So devotee association becomes extremely, extremely important. And then he supports his point by giving the example of the gopis of Brij. He says, look, the gopis were completely 100% ignorant of my true identity. They considered me to be their paramour, their lover, who would give them pleasure. And that's it. Yet, by the power of their constant association with me, they attained the supreme absolute truth, which even Brahma cannot achieve. Like, how powerful is that? He said, those gopis, they displayed such deep attachment to me that their minds, overflowing with ecstasy of being with me, perceived an entire night during the Ras Lila as just a fraction of a second. Actually, that night was 4.3 billion years long. And the gopis thought it was just a fraction of a second. If that happens when the mind is overflowing with the ecstasy of his company. He said, however, when Uncle Akrura came and took me to Mathura, then for the gopis, each night without Krishna was like a millennium of the demigods, not even the earthly millennium of the demigods. Which reminded me, again, Krishna's Lord Chaitanya. What does he say? Shikshastakam 7. Yugayitam nimishena chakshusha pravasaitam Shidayit sarvam Govinda virahenme. He says, in the separation of Govinda, even a moment feels like a millennium. And the whole world, the entire world full of so many living entities, feels like vacant when he's not there with me, when I'm missing him, when I'm separated from him. And you may recall from the Gopi Gita, the Gopi said, Tuti yugayate tvam apashyata. Says, when you're not there, you're going to forest, and you're sitting here in our homes, trying to look busy. Even a tuti means a fraction of a second, feels like a millennium of the demigods, just because we're not able to see you. So Krishna is explaining that being tormented by separation from me, the gopis couldn't imagine anything that would give them satisfaction other than Krishna's return. And says, that's the incomparable excellence of the gopis' pure love of me. How powerful is that? He's saying, not surprising, that I was totally controlled by them. I'm not sure why, but suddenly I just thought of something I heard last week. Actually, it was from His Holiness Indradimna Swami. He said, the two names, Radha and Radhika, they refer to the same person, Radharani. But Radha was the name by which she was known to the Brajavasis when Krishna was in Vrindavan. Once he left Vrindavan to go to Mathura, they started calling him Radhika, which means Adhika is Adhik, means more, which reflected the separation she was feeling from Krishna. So she was feeling the most separation from Krishna when he went to Mathura. So they put the word Adhika with her name. So she became Radhika. I just thought that was very sweet. Anyway, so Lord Krishna imparted all these instructions to Uddhav. And then he said, my dear Uddhav, take my advice. For the sake of attaining the absolute truth, give up all consideration of religion and irreligion as is described in the Shrutis and Smritis, the Vedas and the Puranas, and instead takes shelter of the example of the gopis of Vrindavan. Now, Uddhava had already done that because clearly he'd already been to Vrindavan, been impressed by the devotion of the gopis, so much so that he had wished to become a blade of grass in Vrindavan so the gopis could drop the dust of their lotus feet on him. But the main point here is Krishna is advising Uddhav to forget about all the religious activities as described in the Vedas and Puranas. Just take shelter of the gopis because they're the topmost devotees. You get their association, and that's all you will need to obtain me. So I'm going to stop. See if there are any questions or comments. If none, then you get 5 minutes back.
Second part will start now.
Sorry?
Second part start now, 11.
Pardon? Can you speak louder, please?
Yeah. Bolo, Ucha bolo.
Second part start हो रहा है 11 का.
What is second part? I don't know what second part is.
Srimad Bhagavad से,
She's talking about next 11th canto, part 2. which
Okay, so
starts-
in my book, there's no part 2. So it's chapter
Oh.
13. This is chapter 13.
Okay.
Yeah, chapter 13.
Yeah,
We have
Yeah.
part 2.
yeah, I have part 2.
Okay, all right.
But start 13, chapter 13.
Okay,
Okay.
ठीक है.
That's perfect.
Any questions or comments?
Prabhuji, I have a question.
हाँ Chaitanya बोलो.
Prabhuji, like you said that the whole purpose of hearing, reading, or doing devotional services is to have attraction or love for God. There are few devotees who have been chanting 16 rounds since years, but still has not developed love for chanting, mainly because devotees like me only do chanting because of the sake of finishing rounds and not to attain Krishna Prem. So does this mean that we are not doing devotional service?
Very good question. So clearly, if you are chanting Krishna's name, if you're reading Srimad Bhagavatam, for example, you're doing some deity worship, the 9 processes of devotional service, it's devotional service. But what you're really talking about is the result of a devotional service. Just 1 second. I think somebody's tapping on their desk. Okay. So the result of devotional service depend upon a number of factors: sincerity, care, attention, offenses, motivation, material desires, so many factors. The result is affected by all those factors. So actually, Lord Chaitanya said, if somebody chants for millions of lifetimes, but with offenses, he will never obtain Krishna's love. Never. Even after millions of lifetimes. On the other hand, someone with great attention, sincerity, care, no offenses, with the desire simply to please Krishna, will get it very quickly, maybe even by simply saying it once. So those are 2 extremes.
Yes, Prabhuji.
So therefore, the point is we have to work on our offenses to avoid committing them. And one day we'll talk about those 10 offenses that we talk about holy name, against the holy name. So avoid those. There's another verse from Nectar of Devotion which says, Anya Abhilashita Shunyam. Gyan karmadya navratam anukulen krishnanshilam bhakti uttama. It says we should be devoid of any material desires and not do devotional service mixed with karma or with gyan. In other words, once again, no material motivation. Then we can achieve pure devotional service, and then we will attain Krishna Prem. So why is it that we are not getting there yet? It's because we are what we call practitioners. The simple definition of a practitioner is the one who's practicing. And the simple definition of practice is that you're not an expert. You
Yeah.
practice. But the goal of practice is to become perfect.
Yes.
And that's what we are doing. We're practicing to become perfect. It'll take us time. But how much time will depend upon how sincere we are, how much we avoid offenses, how much we serve the devotees, especially the spiritual master, how sincerely, how good are we at following the instructions of the spiritual master, other senior devotees, and the scriptures. So those factors will determine the amount of time it will take to get there, but we will get there sooner or later if we stay on this.
Okay, thank you so much, Prabhuji.
Sure. So actually, there's another verse in Bhagavatam, Canto 10, chapter 14, Lord Brahma's prayers, where he says that someone who does not get disturbed upon getting miseries and blames it on his karmas, not on the Lord, and does not stop by his heart, by his mind, by his body, remembering the Lord, automatically becomes eligible to go home back to Godhead. Just like a son is automatically eligible to inherit the property of his father. But one criteria is there. The son has to do one thing. And similarly, we have to do one thing. I think Radha Prabhu already knows what that is. He's shaking his head and smiling. So what is that, Prabhu?
Yeah, remain alive.
Remain alive, exactly. So similarly, all we have to do is remain alive in our Krishna consciousness. That's all we have to do. And we'll go back home, back to Godhead. So don't give up. Forget the hindrances, forget the obstacles, forget the issues, forget the problems, forget whatever. Stick with it, and you're guaranteed to go home back to Godhead, guaranteed to get the love. But
But don't forget the Lord.
yeah, that's correct. Always remember Krishna, never forget Krishna.
Yeah.
That's one of the instructions in the Nectar of Devotion. Okay.
Thank you, Prabhuji, so much.
Thank you, Mother.
Thank you. Very nice.
Thank you, Mother.
Thank you. We are so lucky.
I'm lucky.
Very lucky. Thank you so
Prabhuji.
much.
Thank you.
As Lord said, devotees association, so we have your association.
Yes, and I have yours. Thank you, Prabhu.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? All right, then. Thank you very much once again for your association.
Thank
I
you,
really appreciate it.
Prabhuji. Thank you.
Mancha
Mancha
kalpatarubhyascha kripasindhubhyascha
Patitanam
Danam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namah. So we'll see you all next week. Hare Krishna.
Thank you,
Thank-
Prabhuji.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so
Hare
much.
Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Hare
Thank
Krishna.
you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Jai.